All right, I wanted to run through a couple examples of compound interest and show how really if you invest money over like a long period of time and you start when you're young, it makes a huge impact. I ran through like two scenarios here. I think the problem with a lot of this stuff is that people, even I'm guilty of it. You go to school, you go to college, and then you don't really know about investing too much, or you don't learn about it until later in life, maybe until you're in your 30s or 40s or maybe even later. And so even if you invest a lot when you're 40 or 45 or even in your 30s, if you lose 5 or 10 years of compound interest when you're younger, it makes a big difference by the time you're older. So if you start when you're 35 versus starting when you're 25, the difference can be huge. So I think a lot of people don't necessarily know that when they're in their 20s. But I ran two examples here. You can basically there's two different investment vehicles I think that most people are aware about. If you're in the US, it's the traditional 401k and the Roth IRA. So there's a couple rules on both of them, but I'm just going to assume that we take someone that's like 25 years old, maybe they went to college or maybe they didn't go to college, but now they're 25 years old and they're considering working for 30 years. So you're 25 years old, you're going to plan on retiring between the time you're 55 or 60. And with the 401k right now, it's an employer program. Sorry for all the noise. I'm in a very busy area here, so it's always loud. $23,000, I think, is the current level that you can contribute to your 401k. So that's whenever you're working at a company, at least in the United States, a lot of the companies there will have a 401k program. So you get paid, and then part of your money before it gets taxed will go into that investment bucket. So it's called a 401k. You can put up to $23,000 a year into it, at least right now. That'll go up, I'm sure. It goes up, I think, every year, or just about every year. They'll raise it by $500 or $1,000 to adjust for inflation. So if you do that every year for 30 years, and I put in an expected rate of like 10% a year, by the time you're 55 years old, you would have roughly $3.78 million in a 401k. Now, that money hasn't been taxed, so when you do take that money out, you'll have to pay taxes on it, and it'll be treated as ordinary income. But if you're 55 years old or 60 years old, you theoretically could retire because you could start drawing that income instead of working. And when you're retired, you don't necessarily need to have a different income. You can draw the income from the 401k, and you can treat that as taxable income and the money to live off of. So 3.78 might sound like a lot of money, but again, that's $3.78 million in the year 2055. So roughly it's worth about $1.5 to $1.6 million in purchasing power, like if you got the money today, because the money is going to be worth less. It's not going to buy as much stuff in 30 years just due to inflation. So that's a pretty standard exercise with someone that's 25 years old. They plan on working for 30 years. They plan on contributing just the maximum, or they plan on contributing the maximum every year to their 401k, and they're getting an average return of about 10%. Some years it's going to be probably higher than 10. Some years it's going to be lower than 10, but around 10. So it should be right around there, probably, if you do that for 30 years. If you work more years, obviously that's going to help because you'll be contributing for 35 years maybe instead of 30. But that's the 401k. So the other thing is the Roth IRA, which it's the same. I'm doing the same scenario here. So let's say you're 25 years old. You plan on investing into this account for 30 to 35 years. You can't actually draw that money, I think, without a penalty until you're 60 or 59 and a half, I think. So you would be contributing to this fund with post-tax money. So it's money that you earn, you've already paid taxes on, and then you invest it into the Roth IRA. The difference with this account is that you don't have to pay taxes on it. So when you reach 60 years old, and let's say you plan on retiring or you already are retired, you could start drawing that money out. And the nice thing is that it's not treated as ordinary income. You don't have to pay any taxes on it because you already did pay taxes. And when you put the money in there, it was post-tax money that you put in. The caveat here with this particular investment is that you can only put in, I think right now it's $7,000 a year. So that'll probably go up. I think a few years ago it was $6,500 and $6,000, and then maybe even less than that in the past, right? So there's a cap of how much you can put in. But the nice thing is that it grows tax-free, and then when you take the money out, you don't have to pay tax on it. You don't have to treat it as ordinary income. So if you consider someone that's 25 years old, they're going to contribute to this account $7,000 a year for the next 35 years, and they're starting at 25 years old with $0. So that's something maybe I didn't mention on the first scenario. But both people are starting at 25 years old with $0. So you don't have an inheritance, you don't have a savings, you're starting with nothing. So you're 25, you're going to invest for 35 years. In this case, you're starting with 0. You're going to get roughly 10% a year. By the time you're 60, right, you've put in $7,000 every year. You'd have about $1.9 million. And that's in 2055 dollars. So the real purchasing power of that would probably be a little bit closer to about a little bit less than $1 million, probably 750,000 in 2055 or 2060. So that's kind of a simple way to, if you're working a job in the U.S., you can see that you're contributing about $30,000, $23,000 a year roughly to the 401k, which is pre-tax money, and then the Roth IRA is about $7,000 a year of post-tax money. So if you do that consistently for 30 years, you'll end up being 55 to 60 years old with about $5 million in 2055 dollars, which will be probably right around half as much, so about $2.3 to $2.5 million in terms of real purchasing power, like in today's money. But that's a pretty simple way to where if you have a job and you can invest $30,000 a year into these investment funds, if you leave the money there and you continue to invest it over 30 years, you'll have about, $2 to $3 million in purchasing power in 2055. That doesn't include it doing anything else like, a home that might go up in value, or like a brokerage account or any other type of investment. It's just the two most common investment vehicles, I would say. They obviously have, one of them has a really big tax advantage. The other one is kind of like a deferred program from your employer. But if you do that consistently, and $30,000 isn't a tremendous amount of money to be investing every year, you just have to be diligent about it. If you're making $70,000, $80,000, $100,000, $150,000 a year, investing 30 would be somewhat easier, especially considering that 23,000 of it is, you're not actually paying tax on that. That's before you get paid. So you can see the most important thing is just being in the market the longest for a long period of time and letting the money grow, and then, trying to contribute to it on a yearly basis. You don't have to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You just have to put in a small amount of money every year. And then if you're in it, if you start young enough, like at 25 or even at 30, and you're in there for 30 years, you're going to end up, probably doing pretty good. So that's what I wanted to share. You guys can let me know what you think. You can subscribe for more. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.